The solar system used to be a clockwork mechanism. We understood it. We had the math for it. Kepler's laws, Newton's gravity, Einstein's curves. They were the reassuring bars of the cage we lived in. We knew that comets were dirty snowballs, leftovers from the cosmic breakfast that formed the planets. They followed ellipses. They obeyed the sun. They melted. They faded. They died. But the universe has a way of humbling you just when you think you have the blueprints. It began with a whisper in the data, a glitch in the predictable silence of the void. We were looking for rocks. We were looking for ice. What we found was something that looked back. It started with 3I Atlas. Dr. Elias Thorne sat in the control room of the Mauna Kea Observatory, the hum of the cooling servers the only sound in the thin, high-altitude air. On his screen, the object was just a smear of pixels, a smudge of light against the velvet curtain of deep space. But the telemetry was wrong. "It's heading for Jupiter," his assistant Sarah said, her voice tight. "But look at the vector, look at the tail." Elias leaned in. "The rule of law in space is simple. The sun is the wind, and the comet is the flag. Solar radiation pressure pushes dust and gas away from the star. The tail always points out, always. But 3I Atlas was breaking the law." "That's impossible," Elias whispered. The tail of 3I Atlas wasn't flowing away into the dark. It was reaching forward. It was pointing directly at the sun. It looked like a spear, or an antenna, or a finger pointing at the heart of our system. It was spewing plasma jets, not in the chaotic, tumbling way of a melting ice ball, but with a rhythmic, pulsing intensity. It was fighting the solar wind. "It's swimming," Sarah said, a shiver evident in her voice. "It's swimming upstream." This was the first crack in the glass. The astronomical community tried to paper over it with theories about dust grain sizes and optical illusions, but Elias knew better. He watched as the object glowed with a sickly, electric green, the color of diatomic carbon, C2, being excited to the point of screaming. It wasn't just a comet. It was an anomaly. And as it dove toward the gravity well of Jupiter, Elias had the sinking feeling that this wasn't an accident. It was an arrival. If 3I Atlas was a shock, what happened next was a paradigm shift. Weeks later, the alerts on the astronomer's telegram, the emergency broadcast system of the scientific world, began to flash red. A new object had been detected. C-2025 R2 Swan. Elias pulled up the orbital data, overlaying it with Atlas. He stopped breathing for a moment. "It's happening again," he said to the empty room. R2 Swan was identical. It possessed the same ghostly green hue. It hugged the ecliptic plane, the flat disk where the planets live, like a shark patrolling a reef. And, defying all logic, it too had sprouted a tail pointing directly at the sun. According to physical principles, this should not exist. A sunward tail requires complex plasma interactions, local disturbances of the solar wind, or a magnetic field transformation process that scientists have never described. Yet, here were two of them. "Look at the timing," Sarah noted later, pointing at the calendar. R2 Swan reached perihelion, its closest point to the sun, on September 12th. 3I Atlas was scheduled for October 29th. They were synchronized. The realization hit the scientific community like a physical blow. This wasn't a freak weather event in space, it was a pattern. The two comets were moving with a symmetry that felt curated. They weren't just tumbling through the dark, they were marching. The true horror, however, wasn't in the physics, it was in the geography. Elias spent a sleepless night feeding the orbital parameters into the main simulation. He stripped away the noise, the asteroids, the background stars. He left only the Sun, the Earth, Atlas, and Swan. When the simulation rendered the map, he dropped his coffee mug. It shattered, but he didn't hear it. They were perfectly opposed. 3I Atlas was on one side of the Earth. R2 Swan was on the exact opposite side. They formed a straight line that bisected the planet. It was a classic military maneuver. "It's a pincer movement," Elias whispered. The layout was remarkably symmetrical. They were encircling the planet. No one in the official channels wanted to say it. They talked about orbital resonance and statistical coincidences. But Elias looked at the screen and saw a lock clicking into place. Changing direction in deep space, especially near the Sun, requires enormous energy, far beyond the capacity of gravity assists. Yet, reports were filtering in of sudden accelerations, strange shifts. These objects were maneuvering. "We are being bracketed," Elias wrote in his private journal that night. "The solar system is no longer a quiet room. Someone has walked in, and they are standing on both sides of us." The astronomer's telegram update came in at 3 a.m. Subject: Comet C/225 R2 Swan, fragmentation event. The report was dry, scientific, and terrifying. R2 Swan had increased significantly in brightness. This usually implies a flare, an explosion of gas, but it was accompanied by signs of fragmentation. The comet was breaking apart. "It's unstable," Sarah argued the next morning. "See? It's just a rock falling apart under the sun's gravity." "Read the second telegram," Elias said quietly. Sarah scrolled down. K1 Atlas. A fragment related to the 3I Atlas system had also broken into 4 pieces. "They are breaking in unison," Elias said. "It's not just decay, it's a metamorphosis." The fragmentation didn't stop the reverse tails. If anything, it made them stronger. By November 18th, R2 Swan's sunward tail had ballooned. It was no longer a faint streak. It was a prominent structure, fighting the solar wind, stretching toward the Butt star. The comets were shedding their shells. The debris cloud was growing, but the core, the intelligence or the mechanism or the plasma heart, remained focused on the sun. Late one night, fueled by caffeine and exhaustion, Elias drifted away from the hard science forums and into the speculative fringes. He needed an explanation that fit the data, even if it broke the rules. He found the plasma biology hypothesis. The theory was controversial, that plasma, under the right high-energy conditions, could organize, that it could possess primitive consciousness, distributed intelligence, or self-organizing behavior. "What if they aren't ships?" Elias mused, watching the green glow of Atlas on his monitor. "What if they're alive?" It changed the way he looked at the data. A comet is usually seen as a dead thing, a relic. But these objects were reacting. They were feeding on the solar wind. They were positioning themselves.
If the universe is as vast and ancient as we know it is, filled with red dwarfs, the Pleiades cluster, systems like Alpha Centauri, it is arrogant to assume life only comes in meat and bone. Life could be energy. Life could be a high vibrational structure that rides the magnetic field lines of stars. Maybe Atlas and Swan weren't invaders. Maybe they were gardeners, or antibodies, or observers. They are interacting with the magnetosphere, Elias realized. They are just flying past the sun. They are communicating with it. The global tension was rising, even if the general public was only seeing the pretty pictures on the news. But for those watching the deep data, the solar system felt crowded. Mysterious signals were picking up. Strange plasma structures were being spotted in the upper atmosphere. The UFO phenomenon had shifted from grainy videos to atmospheric reality. And in the center of it all, the twins, Atlas and Swan, held their stations. Elias looked at the pincer map again. It's a containment field, he theorized, or a scanning grid. The geometry between the Earth, the comet, and the sun was key. The reverse tails only appeared at certain elongation angles. Skeptics said this proved it was an illusion, but Elias saw it differently. The angles were too perfect. The synchronization was too exact. R2 Swan had an orbital period of 784 years. It had been here before, perhaps when humanity was building cathedrals. Now it was back, and it had brought a partner. This wasn't just nature. This was a strategy. As December approached, the alignment tightened. 3i Atlas and R2 Swan moved like dancers on a stage, with Earth as the bewildered audience in the center. Elias stood on the balcony of the observatory, looking up at the night sky. He couldn't see them with his naked eye. They were too far, hidden in the glare of the sun or the depth of the dark, but he felt them. He thought about the vastness of space, the billions of stars, the silence that we always assumed meant we.
We're alone. We are not alone, he said to the wind. The pincer movement wasn't an attack. It was a revelation. The solar system was waking up. The classical model, the quiet, dead, clockwork universe, was gone. In its place was something dynamic, alive, and filled with forces we had only touched the tip of the iceberg of. The comets were still moving. The reverse tails were still streaming toward the sun, defying the wind, defying the textbooks. Elias went back inside and sat at his terminal. He opened a new file. He didn't know if he would ever publish it, but he had to write it down. He typed, "To understand the pincer movement, we must stop looking at the sky as a void and start looking at it as an ecosystem. We are not the masters of this house. We are just living in one of the rooms." He hit save. The screen blinked, the green cursor pulsing like the heart of a plasma comet. The universe was sending signals, and finally, humanity was beginning to listen.